and create jobs, create income, create wealth for the average American. We can do both.
South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, says the White House and Congress must find a way to work together. But Graham says he doesn't blame the president for being aggravated by Democrats still trying to find a path to impeachment. On Capitol Hill, Mike Emanuel, Fox News.
New York legislators voting to allow Congress to view the president's state taxes, and a federal judge in New York saying banks can turn over Trump financial documents to Congress. Deutsche Bank and Capital One told to comply. Appeals are expected. The Pentagon set to present plans to the White House to send up to 10,000 more American troops to the Middle East. Not clear if the White House will sign off on the plan. Comes amid escalating tensions between the U.S. and Iran. Another nervous night in Oklahoma, many watching the rivers there rise. Bad weather leading to severe flooding. Tulsa's Mayor G.T. Bynum urging residents to take proper precautions.
The main threat here is if people don't take this seriously and don't prepare. And that is how lives could be endangered. So long as we are working and Tulsans take this seriously and pay attention and prepare, then we will get through this safely.
Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum forecasts call for more severe weather over the next few days. And tornadoes touching down near Joplin comes on the 8th anniversary of a massive tornado that killed 161. Also reported in Jefferson City. National Guard called in with heavy machinery. This is Fox News.
Legends aren't born, they are made. And during our Jeep Celebration event at Cars Plus and Mighty, you'll receive up to $6,000 in accessories with the purchase of a new Jeep Wrangler Motor Trend SUV of the Year. Customize your new Jeep to the way you want it. Or how about a new Jeep Grand Cherokee? Save up to $5,000. Or save up to $7,500 on a new Jeep Compass Sport. It's our Jeep Celebration event going on now at Cars Plus and Mighty. Cars Plus, driven by you. Accessory special cannot be combined with other offers. See dealer for details.
So what's the deal? Are you still paying for the right to have your checking account at your bank? Well, at Bank Pacific, we think it's our privilege, not our right. That's why we offer My Green Free Checking, where your monthly maintenance checking fees are zero. That's zero. And it comes with a free Visa check card and monthly green e-statements. My Green Free Checking. Bank Pacific today. Because having you as our customer, that's our privilege.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Viva Bank Pacific.
Gang members being sought in Maryland.
The 16 and 17-year-olds are natives of El Salvador and were arrested by Prince George's County Police last week and charged as adults in the killing of Ariana Funes Diaz. Executive Associate Director for ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations, Natalie Asher, says even though ICE had put in a detainer with the Prince George's County Detention Center after the two were arrested and charged on previous crimes, it wasn't communicated when they were transferred to a juvenile facility.
Sanctuary cities with their policies prevent us from making those necessary communications so that we can prevent such tragedies to occur as in this murder with this young girl.
Investigators say the girl was killed to keep her from talking about a robbery the teens had committed. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
Facebook is joining forces to fight opioid abuse.
Facebook teaming up with the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids and Center on Addiction for what it calls the Stop Opioid Silence campaign.
Understanding that you're not in this alone will help you to heal. Even if it just opens up the door for one person, that's what it's all about.
The company tweeting a video captioning, over 1/2 of Americans know someone affected by the opioid crisis, but only 1/4 of those with opioid addiction get the treatment they need. The goal to encourage those struggling or their families to speak out and seek help. To learn more, folks can head to stopopioidsilence.org. Kristen Goodwin, Fox News.
The troubles continue for an NFL standout.
NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell weighed in on the league's response to the investigation of child abuse allegations against Kansas City wide receiver Tyreek Hill on Wednesday. Speaking with Pro Football Talk, the commissioner said that the league will not interfere with the criminal investigations and will wait to speak to Hill until they have permission to do so. The commissioner also stated that the league will wait until they speak to Hill before making any determination on potential disciplinary action.
Fox's Ryan Mayer, I'm Del Walters. This is Fox News.
Business travel just got easier. Take your data plan with you for only $10 a day to all 17 Data-to-Go destinations. Never worry about additional data roaming charges when you go where your business needs you. The US, China, Thailand, and so much more. Have the assurance you need to check emails, surf the web, and stay connected. Call 688-2677 today to make sure your account is Data to Go ready. Docomo Pacific. Better together.
In illness and in wellness, Calvo's Select Care is health care that is there for you. That's why over 80% of the Guam medical community places their trust and insures with us. We offer our members wellness and fitness programs for a healthier lifestyle and provide a comprehensive medical network on and off island to help members from unexpected illnesses. Contact Calvo's Select Care today for more information.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And we talk about attempts to infringe upon those rights here from time to time. We talk about those who would champion the right to keep and bear arms. Yesterday we talked about a case that is now going to be argued before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court had granted cert to bring the crazy New York City law before it that said that those who lived in New York could keep a firearm in their homes for personal protection, but could only take them out of their homes to 6 shooting ranges within the city. So that's certainly good news, and that's the kind of thing that here on Tall Tales I like to share with you when we have good news about the First Amendment or bad news because someone's attacking it. We like to bring those things to your attention. I have something a little different today. This one comes from, once again, from Bearing Arms, Tom Knighton's column. And the title is, Minnesota Travelers Attacked at Rail Station by Group of 8 to 10 Somali Immigrants. Throughout the nation, state legislatures are looking to restrict the number of rounds your firearm can carry. People who don't know the first thing about firearms, much less about the defensive use of firearms, want to mandate how many rounds your gun can hold at one time. Self-appointed experts who have at most a few range visits, but likely boast far less experience than that, will tell you that you need to practice more. I mean, a revolver should be all that you need, right? Well, not necessarily. Not if you have a group of Somali immigrants looking to harm others. And here's a quote from Minneapolis Scanner. A mob of 8 to 10 males wielding hammers descended upon bystanders at East Bank Light Rail Station on Friday night, injuring several, according to recorded police dispatch audio. The incident was apparently reported at 911 just before 10 on Friday. According to the audio and other social media police scanner reports, a 9:48 p.m. Facebook post in Minneapolis Crime Watch page said the University of Minnesota police were requesting assistance from Minneapolis police and Metro Transit police for a group of 8 to 10 people chasing people with hammers, and that some people were injured. Hammers. So maybe we need to have a hammer control law, at least in Minnesota. A minute later, on Minneapolis Scanner page, said there were 3 police departments were responding to multiple 911 calls, and about 10 to 12 Somali teen males armed with hammers chasing people. Also with several injuries reported. Both Facebook pages regularly post summaries of police scanner radio. A person who claimed on social media to have been at the station when the incident occurred said that the group of males had hammers and bars and that they seemed to be attacking anyone who looked like they might have money or were white. The witness, who said he isn't white, said he didn't want to take on a bunch of dudes with blunt objects, and that he hurried an older white lady away and they walked a few blocks to catch a bus. So that's the kind of the fact pattern here that this article is based upon. Now, these teen males have been reported to be between the ages of 12 to 15, but they represented a clear threat to the people at the station, a serious one it seems. As Elizabeth Vaughn noted over at our sister site, Red State, which is another good conservative website, it's funny that you didn't hear about this on the media. Did you hear about it, Real Joe Cruz?
No, sir.
Uh-huh. That's proof conclusive. Real Joe Cruz did not hear about it on the media. Media maven that he is, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about this incident is how little media attention it received. The second most remarkable thing is that none of the article titles about this story indicate that these teenagers were Somali. Political correctness. She's right on all counts. Now, the reason, of course, is that this doesn't advance any agenda the media finds useful. It doesn't fit into their identity politics scheme or socialism or any of the gender bender things that the left advances. Much of this runs counter to anything journalists want to advance. And since activist journalism is the norm these days, you're not going to see much written about it. In truth, though, I'm no different. If this didn't somehow justify opposition to gun laws, I wouldn't be writing about it either, Tom Knighton says. The main difference is that this is a single-issue website dedicated to protecting and preserving the Second Amendment. I'm not expected to write about news in general. Had these punks knocked over trash cans and been a less threatening nuisance, I wouldn't be writing about it at all. You see, I'm sitting here wondering what would have happened if these thugs had started their rampage on a station platform with a single armed citizen there. The moment it became clear they were both armed and violent, and they were armed, they had hammers and bars, he or she, Tom is old-fashioned, isn't he? He's still using he or she when he should be using what, Real Joe Cruz?
They.
Yeah, so you know that this is not the left-wing media. He's using he or she. He or she would have been justified if Minnesota wasn't a duty to retreat state. Still, if someone used lethal force because they were unable to retreat, there are two possibilities of what would happen in the immediate aftermath. One, of course, is that the thugs would turn and run. The other, unfortunately, is that they would swarm the shooter. Folks, at that point, you want as many rounds as humanly possible. In that regard, it seems Minnesota at least empowers its residents to carry as many rounds in their weapons as they want. This is good. Unfortunately, too many states feel like you shouldn't need 15 rounds in your magazine. At a time like that, you'll wish you had a 1,000-round magazine, assuming you could carry it, though that isn't likely to enter your mind at the moment. So far as I know, no gunfight survivor ever complained about having too many rounds available. Since situation like this can and do happen, I damn sure don't want the state to restrict how many I can have in my weapon. So, once again, now, I suppose the appropriate reaction here, the way the left reacts to guns and gun violence, the appropriate reaction here would be for me to write a nasty letter to the governor of Minnesota and to the leaders of the two houses of their legislature asking for a ban on hammers. right? Because these guys use hammers. So we need to have better hammer control in Minnesota. So far, I don't think we've had that problem here, but if we do, then we need to have a strict hammer control law. Okay, from there we go to Meet the Press. So here I am with my brand new blue pencil, ready to correct grammatical or usage errors in the language that the editorial writers use, ready to point out to them when they're just dead wrong on some of the things that they assert as facts or propositions of law, and ready to give the coveted blue star to the better of the two editorials, a pearl beyond price for the editorial writers. Today I'm going to kick off Meet the Press with one of Andrew's limericks. Here's what Andrew says for today. The Daily News fails to impress so often in Bob's Meet the Press. How can it go far without that blue star? It plods along, though, nonetheless. So let's see how the Daily News is going to do. And for one thing is, at least they wrote their own editorial. And another is they didn't copy it from somewhere else. So that's two steps in the right direction. They're going to write about parole today. And they say Guam's parole system must be significantly improved. Recent oversight hearings regarding the Guam Parole Board show a clear need to overhaul the island's parole system to better protect the community. The legislative hearings show that the parole board has been making decisions without complete information and granting parole to sex offenders without adequately assessing their likelihood to repeat their crimes, according to Senator Therese Tlahi. There are 43 Level 1 sex offenders on parole or probation on Guam, according to the island's sex offender registry. Level 1 offenders are those convicted of a sexually violent offense or a sex crime involving a minor. Of those, 7 are repeat offenders with at least 2 separate convictions for sex crimes. It makes no sense that the parole board would grant parole to a convicted sexual predator without knowing the risk of that person reoffending. The parole board doesn't have access to all reports allowed by law before it decides whether to grant parole, notably psychiatric evaluations and pre-sentencing reports. This is ridiculous, given that their actions have a real impact on individuals and the community at large. The hearings highlighted that, 1, psychiatric evaluations often aren't done because of lack of certified professionals to do them. 2, courts typically keep pre-sentencing reports confidential and don't provide them to the people on the parole board. Does Joey Duenas have anything to do with these reports? He doesn't care what anybody says. He's got to protect people's privacy. While the Department of Corrections has a behavior intervention program, not only isn't it clear if it actually works, but most participants drop out before completing the program. Mike Kinata, chief parole officer, said paroled sex offenders who victimize children will have to report to the parole office weekly instead of monthly. But that tougher reporting requirement, while a good idea, doesn't help prevent sex offender recidivism. Kanata also said the parole board no longer will entertain parole requests from violent criminals unless there is a completed psychiatric evaluation. That's a good start. But that loud slam that you just heard was the livery stable man locking the door to the barn after the horse had escaped. That's not what the editorial says, Real Joe Cruz. That's just my own ad-libbing there. I hope it's okay.
It's fine, sir.
Thank you. The parole board also needs full access to other documentation, such as pre-sentencing reports from the courts. The goal of the oversight hearings needs to be comprehensive changes that result in significant improvements to the island's parole system, ones that make our community safer. Well, that's the daily news for today. And then we go to the Post. Elected officials need to act on GMH solutions with urgency. A bill that that authorizes the government of Guam to borrow $30 million for the construction of an additional trash cell at the Luzon landfill is now public law. The speed with which Bill 79-35 was signed into law to allow our government to build another cell before the existing cells get filled is an indication that our elected leaders are capable of acting quickly in the best interest of our community. We hope they apply that same level of responsiveness, decisiveness, and political will on the Guam Memorial Hospital issue. For decades, elected leaders have heard the cries of the people for a hospital that works. Too often, our friends, neighbors, and family members are out washing cars or delivering special lunch plates in an effort to raise money for health care off-island. Unfortunately, some aren't able to raise enough money in time, and those fundraisers end up helping with funeral expenses. Hospital officials recently went before the 35th legislature requesting a budget that includes the perennial shortfall of $30 million and an additional $57 million to fund critical capital improvement projects. Many of these projects affect the way our island's only public hospital's ability to regain the Joint Commission accreditation or maintain Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services certification. Even more importantly, our people deserve quality medical care at a safe, clean, and well-equipped hospital. Ensuring that the roof doesn't leak, rain doesn't rush through the elevator shaft, the power panel doesn't fail, and equipment is available for a child suffering from an asthma attack, or that supplies and expertise are on hand to help someone suffering a heart attack. None of these are too much to ask. In fact, these are some of the minimum standards when we discuss what human beings deserve in the government hospital. But our elected officials and the community also need to discuss what we want our hospital to be, so fewer of our residents have to leave their families, homes, jobs behind to get health care they need. During recent legislative discussions on funding trash cells at the landfill, Senator Sabina Paris expressed the urgency with which senators needed to take action. Quote, "If we don't find this funding, then we risk the ire of the court and returning back to full receivership," said Paris, who introduced Bill 79. She said the government has two choices: either finance the Luzon landfill under reasonable terms without raising tax collection rates, or we can reject the bill and pay for the construction through an immediate and extreme rate increase. Back to the hospital. If elected officials do not provide the necessary funding and support for Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, they risk the lives of hundreds of Guamanians counting on them to do the right thing. How you decide to help the hospital today speaks to the future state of not just health care delivery, but to the lives of people living on this island. And as Paris said in the trash discussion, timing is of the essence. So that's the Post editorial. One deals with the hospital, the other one deals with parole. I think I like the Post a tad better because I like the call to action better. It asks for senators to do something, whereas the Daily News editorial describes some things that ought to be done without really hanging the label or hanging the tag on anybody who is supposed to do it. Whereas the Post lays it squarely on the legislature. So for today, the coveted Blue Star, Guam Post again. Yeah. I wonder if the editorial board, if the board of directors over there at the Post is going to meet in executive session and give the editorial editors a raise and bonuses.
That would be sweet.
Yeah, but we'd never find out about it.
But if you did, I don't know what would happen then.
We'd never find out about it. Anything that happens in executive session, absolutely, you cannot talk about it to anyone. Okay, then we've got the card. And today's card, I'm going to start out with Francis versus Trini, if you're still there, Francis. I don't think we quite finished with that item on the card yesterday, and I had a few things I wanted to say about one of the posts that I couldn't really squeeze in before Ravel's Bolero, so that's where we're going to start. I told our Carl yesterday that we were going to talk about the equality bill that has just passed the House of Representatives. So our Carl, if you're there, start exercising your, what used to be called your dialing finger. I don't know what we would call it anymore since an awful lot of our international radio listening audience, Real Joe Cruz, has probably never seen a dial phone. And then I've got Judy versus Simon, Frank, and Francis. And I've got PJ, as you were, BJ versus Pika, BJ Cruz versus Pika Farran at the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. And I've got Robert Underwood versus Mike San Nicolas. I've got ID Politics versus Marriott. And Gramsci versus Guam. I'm not going to get back into the governor versus the Schatz list today. I think we've pretty much finished that one up. Okay, so Francis versus Trini. I had one post here. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah. That I started talking about yesterday and I didn't really get a chance to finish. And this is from Jesse Lemtiaco. And this is what he said. Around 1900, all the way up to the invasion of the Japanese invasion, the U.S. Navy's #1 goal was to make Chamorro people learn English and learn American ideology. #1 goal. Now that was that's quite a statement. Of all of the things that that Navy commands do, that was their #1 goal. Well, Jesse, from my reading of the period between the Spanish-American War and World War II and the Japanese occupation, that isn't quite correct. And I started out with, kind of the historical foundation, but this is kind of how it went. Yeah, we had the Spanish-American War, and yesterday I informed you that it's my conclusion that the Spanish-American War was not about Cuba or even Puerto Rico. It was about the Philippines. that the United States needed a good pretext to invade the Spanish Philippines. So there had been a lot of rumblings about Spain and Cuba and the way the Spanish were treating the Cubans, etc. Well, you'll recall from American history that when the battleship Maine blew up in Havana Harbor, the United States blamed that on the Spanish, and this touched off the Spanish-American War. And the United States sent troops to Cuba and to Puerto Rico to basically unseat the Spanish regime in Cuba. But at the same time, Teddy Roosevelt, then the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, gave orders for the American fleet, Pacific Fleet, which was conveniently anchored in Hong Kong, to sail to Manila and to sail into Manila Bay and to take Manila. And the reason for doing this was to protect American commerce, American shipping in the Pacific, as though the Spanish Navy in the Philippines was some kind of a threat to American shipping in California. So the United States, as I understand it, wanted the Philippines as a base to do its China trading. Trading with China at the turn of that century was very important to the mercantile nations of the world. The riches of China made for good business. Some of the European powers actually carved up China. The British grabbed Hong Kong. The Portuguese grabbed Macau. The Germans had some concessions. There was an international settlement. I'll come back to this after this break, and then we'll get back on the calendar.
2-for-1 dinner time is back at Ruby Tuesday Guam. That's 2 fresh garden bars, 2 tasty entrees, and a sweet dessert to share for just $25.99. 2-for-1 dinner time for a limited time at Ruby Tuesday Guam.
If you've ever struggled for breath, you know what a scary experience it is. Whether you have asthma, emphysema, COPD, lung cancer, or another respiratory illness, the right medical treatment makes all the difference. GRMC's Pulmonology Clinic has the latest technology and respiratory equipment, staffed by world-class pulmonologists. Make an appointment today with GRMC's Pulmonology Clinic and start breathing easier. GRMC, where patients are partners.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So the United States was successful. However, it wasn't easy because the Philippine insurrectionists, who had their own war for independence going with the Spanish, led by Emiliano Aguinaldo, thought that the United States was coming to the Philippines to help the Philippines become independent. It didn't turn out that way. So after the United States occupied the Philippines, they had another war that we refer to as the Philippine Insurrection. And more Americans, and this was basically American soldiers versus Filipino rebels, more Americans were killed in the Philippine insurrection than in the Spanish-American War. But it finally ended. The United States had the Philippines. And in order for the Philippines to fulfill its purpose, at the time that it was taken from the Spanish in 1898, the ships of the world were powered by coal. And by the way, there used to be coal here on the island. When I first got here, I asked when we were talking about coal in class, and I asked one of my students, have you ever seen coal? And a couple of them said, yeah, there's some down by my house. And a couple of them actually brought some coal to school. It must have been left over from that coaling station period of time. But anyhow, during the first part of the 20th century, coal ships were run by coal. So the United States needed coaling stations between California and the Philippines. First one was Hawaii. The United States leased Pearl Harbor from the Kingdom of Hawaii about 1893. And then, of course, when the United States annexed Hawaii, about 1898, that was one of the coaling stations. And the reason that the United States wanted Guam was that would have been the second coaling station between Honolulu and Manila. That's the reason the United States wanted Guam. Well, we got into the 20th century and a couple of things happened. Ships stopped burning coal and started burning oil. And then in 1922, there was a Washington Naval Conference where the Pacific powers agreed to certain arms limitations. And as part of that treaty, the United States agreed not to fortify Guam. So there had been a Marine Corps seaplane base in Guam, had to be shut down because the United States agreed not to fortify Guam. So there sat the Navy in Guam. At that time, Guam was not a territory. Guam wasn't even a colony. It was a possession. It was, in a sense, a large naval station. And in another sense, I suppose it was like a ship that never went anywhere. It had a captain and a crew. And the captain's job was just to maintain the ship. And the reason that the United States wanted to maintain the ship was not that the United States wanted it so bad, but they didn't want the Japanese to have it. In 1904, the Japanese were able to defeat the Russians and were well into beginning their own colonial empire. In 1904, they beat the Russians. 1910, they made Korea a colony. About the same time, they made Taiwan a colony. They colonized Okinawa at the end of the 1800s. So pretty clear that the Japanese would have, had there been a vacuum on Guam, the Japanese would have rushed in and taken control of it. So that was what the reason that we had a naval. That's how the naval station came to be here. This was not, let's go in and find ourselves a people to conquer. It just so happened that there were people on the island when the United States moved in. And the way my understanding is that there had been no people on the island, it wouldn't have made any difference. The United States would have moved in anyhow. I suspect that some might have even preferred that. But when the United States moved in, there were people here. And the United States did a lot of things that improved a lot of the people. Provided, for one thing, clean, fresh water, because there are an awful lot of people that had waterborne parasites. The life expectancy dramatically increased after the United States moved in. Infant mortality rate went down, etc. And the United States just kind of sat there like the USS Go Nowhere, and did whatever appeared to be necessary for the health and welfare of the people who were living here. It's medical care, schools, etc. Of course, when the Navy got here, guess what language they spoke? Can you figure it out, Real Joe Cruz?
Spanish?
Try again.
Chamorro?
No, one more time.
Japanese?
Nope.
English?
English.
Wow.
Yeah, they spoke English. And at that time, the English at that time, as it still is, was a world language. Very few people could speak Chamorro other than those who learned it from their mothers. So as a matter of, I suppose, convenience, people were encouraged to learn to speak English, but I haven't read about anyone being forced to learn English during that period of time. I suspect that an awful lot of people were desirous of learning English because they could use it to improve their lot in life. So to say that between 1900 and the time that the Japanese occupied Guam, it was the #1 goal of the United States Navy for Chamorro people to learn English, I'm going to have to send that off to Snopes, and I think it's going to come back with a couple of Pinocchios on that one, Jesse Lemtiaco. So there were a lot of things that happened during that period of time. I don't think that was one of them. So then, we know that in December of 1941, the Japanese attacked Guam as part of its overall attack on Western nations in the Pacific. It was the beginning of what the Japanese called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. They were going to drive out all the Europeans and make a co-prosperity sphere for all of the Asian folks and some Pacific Islanders. Well, I don't think we need to go into that for too long to know how that turned out and how much the so-called beneficiaries of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, how appreciative, quote unquote, they were of the Japanese efforts. So then after and one other thing happened in that interwar period. 1936, a gentleman named B.J. Bordallo, the father of Governor Ricardo Bordallo, and F.B. Leon Guerrero, two very important statesmen, took up a collection to buy tickets to go to Washington to lobby the United States Congress to make the people of Guam citizens. They were unsuccessful, but they gave it the old college try. Now, I guess we should probably criticize them because what they did made it harder for Chamorros to advance the cause of self-determination because we had these two Sina go to Washington and ask for citizenship. And after the war, the naval government took over again after the war. And in 1949, primarily due to the efforts of a gentleman named Carlos Taitano, who became the Speaker of the 8th Guam Legislature, and doesn't get as much credit for this as he should, primarily due to his efforts, the Congress enacted the Organic Act, signed by Harry Truman. And the Organic Act created Guam as a territory. You read the Organic Act, the second sentence says, there is a territory of Guam. Up until that time, Guam was not a territory. It wasn't even a colony. So the colonial period for Guam began at that time. The Organic Act provided for an independent judiciary, a popularly elected legislature, and a governor appointed by the President of the United States. Pretty similar to all of the organized territories at that time. Most people don't realize it, but Hawaii was an organized territory, and the people of Hawaii never got to vote for their governor until Hawaii became a state. Up until Hawaiian statehood, the governor was appointed by the President of the United States. So in the beginning, we had a district court, a legislature, a district court with a judge appointed by the President, a governor appointed by the President, and a legislature. Well, as time moved on, we got an elected governor. The Supreme Court was created pursuant to the Organic Act. So we had an completely independent local judiciary, and the same district court that any one of the 50 states has. And governor elected by the people. So by the time all of these things were in place, we had almost complete self-rule. In the early 70s, Congress gave us the ability to adopt our own Constitution. We took a crack at it, but we couldn't do it. This was the second time that we had tried it. First time was 1969, when we tried to, we had a constitutional convention. And interestingly enough, one of the proposals in that constitutional convention was that that one of the things that Guam could do would be to petition the national government in the state of Hawaii to have Guam annexed to Hawaii as a county of Hawaii. County of Hawaii, 2 senators, congressmen, get to vote for your governor, solves all the problems in one swell foop, right? Well, that didn't seem too popular with the delegate. No, then then it would just be, it would be just Hawaiians telling us what to do. Well, that's right. That's kind of how it works with government, unless you're always going to be looking for, unless you are the king of the Sultan of Brunei, you're always going to have somebody looking for you. And I suppose if we had an independent Guam, we could have a sultan who could have those kinds of powers. So we still have the ability to enact our Constitution. And the other missing piece is our tax legislation. And that is that we've had the ability to create our own tax structure since 1986. You want to know what we've done about it? Are you ready for this, Real Joe Cruz? It's going to take me about 15 seconds to explain this. Here it goes. That's it. We didn't do. We haven't done anything with it. So, except to the extent that we haven't embraced it, we've got complete self-rule here, complete home government on Guam. To about the same extent that any one of the 50 states has. We got advantages that the 50 states don't have. All of the federal income tax that's paid here stays here, including the federal income tax paid by military folks. Section 30 money, remember? And as I explained yesterday, the Interstate Commerce Clause doesn't apply here. The governor of Guam can execute federal law if he has a duty to do that. That's why well, backing up a second, U.S. customs laws don't apply to Guam. That's why Guam is a duty-free port. And that's why you see Guam customs agents at the airport, not folks from the CIA, from the United States Customs and Immigration Service. So that's how all of these things happened. And none of them happened because around 1900, the United States' number one goal was to make the Chamorro people learn English. Not so. Okay, so I didn't get a chance to completely finish that up yesterday, and I thought I want to come back to it. Let's see. My next item here is our Carl versus equality. So I'm just about at the next break. I'm going to spend a little time with Facebook comments, and then our Carl, I hope you could call in so we can pick you up right after the next break. Okay, I've got, let's see, Facebook. Jesse Limtiaco, Senator Bob, did you ever read this book yet? And the name of the book apparently is How to Hide Empire. And I guess the yet means that someone has commanded that I read it.
Nope.
No, you haven't read that book yet? No, I haven't read it. Let's see, Carl Bora Nelson, also known as R. Carl. Here's one you may find interesting, Jess, the 100-year marathon on China's ongoing worldwide strategy to dominate the world militarily and economically. And the name of the book is 100-Year Marathon Strategy, Replace Superpower. So I'm going to make a note of that, and about a week from now, when we start the program, I'm going to say, Jesse Limtiaco, have you read that book yet? All right, let's see here. Elwin Champaco Quitino. I heard a story once that the U.S., like many countries, sought gold or places that had gold to increase its power and monetary economic value. They heard that many galleons crashed around Guam carrying gold bullion, which piqued the interest of the U.S. This, they say, is why they wanted it so badly. That's what I heard. Well, thanks for sharing, Elwin, but you listen long enough and you're likely to hear almost anything. Okay, so we got a short break coming in, and Carl, I don't see the light lighting up indicating that you called in.
Hi, welcome to this Subway ad for the new Sweet and Smoky Steak and Guac Signature Wrap. How would you like it?
I'll take my ex-girlfriend, just checking in.
Aw.
Hey, David, it's me, just checking in. I'm doing great. Just got the new Sweet and Smoky Steak and Guac Signature Wrap from Subway. Creamy guacamole, smoky sweet with Hio mesquite sauce, and double the tender steak. They just know what I want before I do. So, yeah, things are going pretty great for me. Subway, make it what you want. Limited time only at participating restaurants. Double meat based on average 6-inch sub. Okay, bye.
We know too well the inconvenience of not having power after a storm. You worry about the food in the freezer going bad. Nights get hot. It's hard finding comfort when going to sleep. These are realities. But with solar and battery storage from Micronesia Renewable Energy, these realities can be a thing of the past. The solar works during the day and the batteries power your home at night. Call 632-2613 to see how solar plus battery storage can make life a little more convenient. MRE, the smarter choice.
Isn't that great music, Carl?
Yeah, it's very good.
And the real Joe Cruz can really pick 'em, can't he?
Yes. You guys have good taste there at Tall Tales.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to give the real Joe Cruz all of the kudos on that one. So, Carl, what can you tell me about the Equality Act that just passed the House of Representatives?
Well, it was the title sounds very harmless, but the more I read into it, the more I became alarmed. And as a lawyer, you would appreciate how this opens up fertile ground for millions and millions of dollars of lawsuits for people of faith that are all for allowing people to live their lives in private and do what they want as long as they don't harm anybody else, their life, liberty, or property. But this would open up just a tremendous gold mine for lawyers, because people could sue over just any real or imagined infractions of their gender identity, and that is massive.
Indeed, Carl.
Yeah, I'm sure as a lawyer, I mean, you can especially appreciate what this would mean in the way of potential lawsuits, and maybe you might want to expand on that as a lawyer and a former judge. I mean,
I don't think I'm going to be suing anybody on those grounds, Carl.
I know you wouldn't, but I mean, you can imagine what some of your fellow lawyers would be very, very excited about the potential that this would open up in the way of lawsuit income.
According to the Heritage Foundation, the proposed Equality Act, or actually the past Equality Act, H.R. 5, turned sexual orientation and gender identity into protected classes. Like race and some of the other protected classes under the 1964 Civil Rights Act and 1968 Fair Housing Act. The bill creates obvious liberty, equality, privacy, and safety concerns. H.R. 5 would empower the federal government to impose civil and criminal punishments on citizens who dissent from sexual orientation and gender ideology, including medical professionals, parents, women and girls, business, and charities. The bill would violate their rights to freedom of conscience, religion, and speech, etc. And let me see if I can find some of the particulars here, Carl. Section 3 expands the definition of public accommodations to any establishment that provides goods, service, or program, including a store, shopping center, online retailer, etc., or establishment that provides health care, accounting, or legal services. Medicine will be politicized. Doctors nationwide will not be allowed to treat gender dysphoria according to their own best judgment, and even a referral to another doctor would be a violation of the law. Transgender advocates recommend puberty blockers for children at age 11, cross-sex hormones at 16, and sex reassignment surgery at 18. Side effects include sterility, loss of bone density, cognitive decline, and increased risk of cancer. Under sex orientation and gender identity laws, activists have sued hospitals in California and New Jersey for discrimination because the hospital's doctors declined to remove the reproductive organs of healthy patients. Sexual identity and sexual orientation and gender identity laws pressure medical professionals to practice that medicine regardless of scientific or conscience-based objectives. Section 2.7 of the bill labels talk therapy to address gender dysphoria as a form of discrimination. Gender professionals who serve all customers but who understand that humans are born male or female and who believe that marriage means a union between one man and one woman could be compelled to use their artistic gifts to create custom goods and services for events that violate their consciences, such as sex change celebrations. And more of the same. It's more of the same sexual orientation, gender identity stuff that we've unfortunately come across before. Section 5 rules that the desegregation provides for a desegregation of public education. It could pressure K through 5 schools and publicly funded colleges to teach the sexual orientation, gender identity curriculum. Federal courts could require the curricula in the same way schools are ordered to remedy real racial discrimination by requiring Black history curriculum. So, in other words, the Equality Act is the effort to celebrate homosexuality and the transgender identity phenomenon, not just to tolerate it or accept it, but to celebrate it. And if you don't, you're going to be in a heap of trouble. So I'll spend a minute with this after we come back from the break and then go on to the card.
Hey, thanks, Bob.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Tornadoes touching down. I'm Del Walters. Fox News reported near Joplin in Jefferson City, Missouri. Missouri's governor tweeting that some people are still trapped as the result of the string of tornadoes hitting his state.
During the overnight hours, the main threat is going to be from far northeastern Oklahoma, through central into east central Missouri and even into central Illinois, perhaps continuing on into Indiana. We've got a pretty strong line of storms moving across central Illinois right now, and that will head towards Indiana towards morning.
National Weather Service forecaster Liz Lightman comes on the 8th anniversary of a massive tornado that killed 161 people in the state. Authorities in Carl Junction going house to house to search to see if anyone was injured. Show me the money. A federal judge in New York says Congress can't see the president's financial documents.
Judge Eduardo Ramos in today's hearing said the chances of the president's attorneys making a successful argument that the subpoenas were unlawful is unlikely. Democrats have been attempting to get records from Capital One and Deutsche Bank. House committees say it's needed to look into any foreign influence in U.S. politics related to the president's election. Lawyers for President Trump hoped to get more time to argue the legalities of the subpoenas. Deutsche Bank has been a regular lender to the president's real estate business. Capital One has been tied to various Trump hotel operations. In New York, Gernal Scott, Fox News.
In Washington, charges of a cover-up by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, White House meeting that followed, was cut short.
Democratic leaders insist they were ready to hold serious talks on infrastructure with the president. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer told reporters what happened in the White House would make your jaw drop.
When we got in the room, the curtains were closed. The president, there was a place for him at the front so he could stand.
Right before the scheduled meeting, Democrats huddled at the Capitol and talked impeachment.
Fox's Rachel Sutherland. This is Fox News.
Travel the world and then some with the 2 million United Miles sweepstakes from First Hawaiian Bank. Enter and you could win the grand prize of 1 million miles or be one of 6 other lucky winners. The world is big. Our prize is bigger. Enter at fhb.com/2 million miles. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Sweepstake starts on May 1st and ends June 30th, 2019. Open to legal residents of Guam and CNMI. Ages 18 years or older. Visit 2millionmiles.com for official rules. First Hawaiian Bank. Member FDIC. Equal housing lender.
Okay, I think it's coming up soon.
Yeah, we're in Route 1 and near the airport intersection, right?
There, see it? What's the promo code? Look for the promo code.
Check out the Vantage Digital Billboard and reap the rewards. Catch the promo code on the screen and get $10 off your stroll ride by inputting the promo code on the Stroll Guam app.
Did you see it?
You got it. I got it. You just focus on driving.
Take advantage today and take a look at Vantage Advertising's digital billboard located on Route 1 at the airport intersection.
Facebook fighting back, head of cybersecurity telling Congress gone are the days when its platform is used by Russian bots.
Facebook cares deeply about defending the integrity of the democratic process. We don't want anyone using our tools to undermine elections or democracy.
Facebook's head of cybersecurity, Nathaniel Gleischer. A piece of American history uncovered, a sad chapter.
The Alabama Historical Commission says the dimensions, construction, and building materials from the wreckage found off the northern Gulf Coast match those of the Clotilda. The wooden ship illegally transported 110 people from West Africa to Mobile in 1860 before it was taken to Delta waters north of Mobile Bay and burned. The commission also saying the remains show signs of a fire. The slaves brought over on the Clotilda were freed after the Civil War ended. They used what little money they had to buy land, settling in a community still known today as Africatown. Steve Rappaport, Fox News.
To the moon, Alice. Sketchy in the 60s, updated in 2019.
Humans won't be on Mars for years yet, but your name could be there much sooner. NASA's asking people to email in their names. They'll stencil those names in very tiny letters onto chips, and those chips will be on board the Mars rover to be launched by NASA in 2020. NASA's using an electron beam to stencil those names. The font is 1,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. With lettering that little, they say they can write more than 1 million names on a single chip. It's part of a public engagement program, and it's free. Head to the NASA website and look for the Mars 2020 page to sign up. Jill Nato, Fox News.
Former Vice President Joe Biden insulted by the leader of North Korea. Kim Jong-un says the Democratic presidential candidate is a fool of low IQ. Joins President Trump and Barack Obama as past targets. No comment from Biden. I'm Del Walters. This is Fox News.
Save big. Save really big when you bundle up your insurance policies with Nanbo Insurance. Insure your home, auto, motorcycle, or business with Nanbo and enjoy great savings, up to 50%. When it comes to insuring your property, no one knows better than the company with over 50 years of service to the community. Don't compromise the things that matter to you most. Call Nanbo today at 477-9754 or visit nanbo.com for more information. Nanbo Insurance, serving you since 1968. Here at APL, our core values give the company its heart and soul. Whether it's connecting your business with our global network through our newly enhanced service or investing our efforts into giving back to the community, APL is committed to serving you. We humbly honor the opportunity to find innovative solutions for you and your business. To learn more about our enhanced service, call 588-4651 or visit www.apl.com/Guam for more details.
Just a little bit more on the Equal Rights Act, and then I'm going to go to Judy versus Simon, Mike, and Francis, the continuing story of the Consolidated Commission on Utilities. Section 7 of the Act adds sexual orientation and gender identity rules to the Civil Rights Act's Title VII on equal employment opportunity. Employees could sue their employers if the offered health insurance does not cover sex reassignment. Companies like Hobby Lobby and religious charities like Little Sisters of the Poor would have direct conflicts of conscience without protection from the Religious Freedom of Restoration Act, which per Section 9 of the proposed bill cannot be raised as a defense. So, in other words, people that pay for health insurance are going to wind up paying for somebody's sex reassignment surgery. If you're okay with that, well, okay. But here's the sticking point right now that's really easy to understand. Both employees and employers could be compelled to use preferred pronouns. Yeah. I don't think that you could get the real Joe Cruz to use preferred pronouns. In fact, I'm going to ask them right now. Are they listening?
Yes, they're listening.
Yeah. So employers and employees could be compelled to use preferred pronouns according to gender identity, meaning people would be forced by law to refer to a man as she or a woman as he or a person as they. I've been practicing that one a lot, haven't I, Real Joe Cruz? Or Z or Faye or anything else someone desires. And an individual could claim a hostile work environment if he or she is referred to as he or she. And let me read that again. An individual could claim a hostile work environment if he or she is referred to as he or she. So let's take an example. Let's take a person, they, who started life with male plumbing. If he's in the workplace and the boss says, Joe went to work for us this morning. Let's see what he's doing right now. And Joe overhears he might be able to file suit against the boss because Joe may prefer to be referred to as she or they. It's a brave new world we live in. Let's see, I've got a phone call coming in here from them. It's our Carl back on the line. Hello, our Carl.
Yeah, hi, Bob. Yeah, just to illustrate how serious this can get, I've heard that in Canada, it was proposed, I don't know if it went through, but it was actually seriously proposed that people could go to prison, to jail for misgendering someone. In other words, for whatever reason, for religious reasons or whatever, they could be imprisoned or fined for simply refusing to use someone's preferred gender. And I heard someone speak about this topic, and he said he gave what I thought was a common sense response. He said he really would have no problem if someone came up to them on a one-to-one basis and said, I identify as one of the 50 genders, and this is my chosen gender, and I'd appreciate it if you would have referred to me as G or J or whatever the gender is. And if two people can come to a mutually agreed on agreement, not through threat of government force, that's something different, and that is acceptable. But once you introduce government force into the equation, it becomes very different. That is tyrannical.
Well, Carl, that's why I sometimes make the statement that equality eats up freedom, and that doesn't sound right at first. But when you stop to think of it, freedom means to conduct your life without restraint, so long as you're not getting in somebody else's face, right? That's freedom or liberty, right?
Yeah, you're not interfering with anyone else's life, liberty, or property.
Yeah. Now, equality, though, means that everything must be the same. So if you look around, everything you're familiar with, where do you find anything that is the same as anything else? People are never the same. Everybody is different. And it's good that they are, because we wouldn't have much of a civilization if we were all the same. We got to have butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, right? So when we run across inequality, that is where everything is not as equal as some central planner would want, that equality has to be forced. And the coercive force of the state has to be used to make that equality. Well, in the process of doing that, someone is going to lose his freedom. I'm going to lose my freedom. If this statute became here, I'm going to lose my freedom to refer to the gentleman on the other side of the glass here, also known as the real Joe Cruz. I'm not going to be able to refer to him as he. I'd have to refer to him as the real Joe Cruz.
Yeah, even people with pretty much identical genetic makeup, identical twins, raised on the same household, the same parents, the same food, the same upbringing, basically, almost identical, they end up different. I mean, they have different levels of achievement. They end up in different conditions in life. Sometimes one goes downhill and another goes uphill, despite having identical genetics.
So that's what I mean when I say that equality tends to eat up freedom. If things are equal and they remain equal, fine. But in order for things that are not inherently equal to become equal, oftentimes state violence is necessary, and that impinges upon somebody's freedom. Sometimes we balance it out and we say that the loss of freedom is acceptable because of the goal involved. But it's very dangerous here where we have a situation with this sexual orientation, gender identity, when the government coercive force is being used to force us to pretend. You know, like what we did when we were small children and we believed in Santa Claus. It's forcing us to pretend that a man can, two men can enter into a marriage, or that someone who's born with male plumbing can later on become a female. And if you don't do the right kind of pretending, even now, you know, there's a certain element of society that'll really beat up on you. It's bad enough to have it that way without having the government use its power to beat up on you, right, Carl?
Yes, exactly. And I'll just leave one last comment before I hang up. You know, the female athletics right now is going through some serious problems because of the policies that are passed that allow people that identify as a particular gender. In other words, they, over a period of time, or maybe, you know, a short period of time, they decided, well, I want to identify as a female, and that should qualify me to compete against females. So these males have been competing against females with their built-in skeletal superiority, their muscular strength superiority, their hormonal superiority, and they've been winning a lot of competitions against females. And it's basically men competing with women, and it's not fair. And you know, in many schools, it's now acceptable for someone who identifies as a woman, hasn't had anything done, to change in the women's shower. And a lot of girls are uncomfortable with that. You know, I mean, they're seeing things that really they've never seen before. You know, so some parents are getting up in arms, and some of the women are complaining that, you know, this is not working out. You know.
Well, there's no way it can work out, Carl. But you touched on something there with the female, the so-called female athletics. So if there is a male who has a certain amount of athletic talent, let's say that we rated talent on a 1 to a 100 scale, and anything above 90, you're going to be winning a lot of gold medals, right? Well, let's say you got a male who's somewhere in the 80s. His best bet then is to present himself as a female if he wants to win a lot of gold medals, right?
Yeah.
So, well, anyhow, Carl, as per your request, we put that second item on the calendar, and I'm glad you did. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'm going to keep watching this, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much for discussing it. I appreciate it. I wanted to learn more about it, and I am learning from your comments. All right, thanks a lot, Bob.
Okay. Here's just one more thing here. I've got an article from a website called LifeSite News. What makes a person trans? What makes a person a transgender? And we heard that, you know, I never heard that word. 5 years ago, I never heard of a transgender. I would have thought it was maybe some kind of an airline or something like that. But now it's everywhere. And the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, LGBT. So what is a transgender? And here's what LifeSite News says. The accepted LGBTQ standard for being a, quote, real trans woman or trans man is simply that a person desires to self-identify as the opposite of his or her biological sex and be socially acceptable as such. If a person feels distressed about his birth gender, then the politically correct action, I gotta unclip this. Just opening up a paper clip here, Real Joe Cruz is taking too much time. The politically correct action is for everyone to affirm the new and, quote, authentic gender identity. I'm going to read that sentence again. If a person feels distressed about his or her birth gender, then the politically correct action is for everyone to affirm the new and authentic gender identity, the one that exists only in the trans person's feelings. And as per this Equality Act, if you don't, you may have to pay a price. In a recent interview on Fox News, transgender lawyer Jillian Weiss, executive director of the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, was asked repeatedly by Tucker Carlson, what are the legal standards to be transgender? Finally, the legal specialist admitted, there are no legal standards. That's right. No legal standards or legal definitions of transgender exist. As Carlson pointed out, $11 billion of federal money is spent on sex-specific programs, such as the Small Business Administration investing in businesses owned by women. Without a legal definition, these funds become easy prey for, as Carlson puts it, charlatans who claim to be women simply to get the money. How to become a transgender. The Wiki article entitled How to Transition from Male to Female outlines a simple 5-part system for men who want to become women. Here's a sample. Now, don't try this at home, okay? 1, seek a qualified therapist. Ask your friends in the trans community to recommend a therapist. Browse the internet in search of a therapist experienced in working with members of the trans community. Receive a diagnosis. Over the course of a series of sessions, your therapist will evaluate your individual situation, issuing a diagnosis. After determining that you have consistently experienced symptoms such as disgust with your genitals, a desire to remove signs of your biological sex, and or a certainty that your biological sex does not align with your true gender, your therapist will likely diagnose you with gender dysphoria. These instructions are typical of the advice offered to those who believe they may be transgender. I myself followed a similar series of steps, yet in hindsight, after transitioning from male to female and back again, I see that many important topics are ignored. Such advice placing vulnerable people at risk. Well, enough. But I think the real takeaway here is that for transgender, there are no legal standards, and 2, the accepted LGBTQ standard for being a real trans woman or trans man is simply that a person desires to self-identify as the opposite of his or her biological sex and be socially accepted as such. And if that's the case, then the political correct action is for everyone to affirm the new authentic gender identity. So I think these things are somewhat important when we understand that the United States Congress has passed the Equality Act that homes in right on what we're talking about here. Okay, let me find out what Michael thinks about all this stuff. Good afternoon, Michael.
Hey, Bob.
Tell me what you think, Michael.
All right. So, I totally agree. I think these people with identity, genders, and all that stuff is all very, very crazy. However, just so to add a little fairness or a little balance to your show, the statute I believe, is aimed at more of a bullying aspect. So, for instance, you're a former Marine, and according to the movies, drill sergeants would line up all the men and start referring to them as ladies until they've earned the right to be called men.
Yeah, that's probably not too far off, yeah.
I didn't want to put words in anybody's mouth.
Well, except we call them drill instructors. That's the only correction I could make there, Michael.
Yeah.
That's important, right?
Yeah. DIs. Yeah, the DI. And so basically, he would yell at the men, who are all men, and refer to them as ladies as a motivational tool to get them to work harder and earn their status as men. And same thing in referring to some women, they would refer to a woman as, among guys at a bar, and they see it not so attractive in their opinion. Woman, they would refer to them as a guy. And so basically, I think what this is a combination, a gender identity bill coupled with, and this is why you have those important, is to prevent bullying. Now, I happen to think the solution is really grow up there and don't be so sensitive if somebody calls you a girl. So if, for instance, you wanted to get in trouble under this bill with the real Joe Cruz, you would be calling him a she, and he would get upset because he identifies as a he, I assume.
The real Joe Cruz, he just stepped out. I think he went. I think he went to the.
Beat up by the guy.
Yeah, I don't want to tell you which room he went to because he's out of the room. But
he sounds like a real male there, so I don't want to mess with him. Right. The second item was where you were talking about the. So one is it's kind of more like an anti-bullying, where people are intentionally calling people by the identity by a term that they're not. So it's a combination bill. It's a combination anti-bullying and a gender thing. The second one is when you were mentioning about guys wanting to identify as girls so they can have better competition, they can compete better. And what happens is apparently in order to qualify under most international sports and most national sports, they have rules. You don't just walk on the field a full-blown guy and say, I identify as a girl, now let me compete with the girls. You have to show that you've been taking estrogen for a certain period of time and that your testosterone levels have been reduced to a certain level over a period of time. And so we do have those type of rules. However, the girls are still crying foul because, bottom line, just like testosterone, like steroids for bodybuilders and all, when you grew up a male, your testosterone kicked in and you had bigger muscles and stronger, denser bone mass. Most males are much thicker bones than most females. And so for them to then change, they still walk into the field with that greater muscle mass and bone mass, even though they now, even if they're taking the chemicals that make them appear on a test to be almost female-like. And that's where the females are crying foul. And the real problem now is different sports have different levels of requirements. So
but you know, Michael, in all of the sports, we get really excited about doping, about people attempting to change their physiology by injecting certain kinds of hormones. So if you have to do that to participate, you shouldn't participate. You should participate as you are without any chemical enhancements or detraction. So I'm going to stick with my original position there. And
no, I totally agree with your position. I think it's completely insane to even entertain these people. And until a few years ago, the psychiatry manuals would identify this as a mental mental defect. No, mental disease. It's a mental disease. Yeah. If you have the impulse to chop your hand, there's a psychiatric disorder where people like to chop their limbs off. Okay, and if you have that disorder, you're considered unbalanced. Now we have it where people want to, not their limbs, but their genitals, because they feel like they're something else, and then it gets really disgusting after they chop the genitals off. They also do some surgeries to make a fake vagina, which is not a vagina. And then what's really driving everybody nuts, did you bring up the story about the guy who walked into the emergency room and they thought he was a guy, but it turns out he was a girl?
And he was pregnant and he lost the baby? Yeah.
Stillborn because they didn't have clue, because they were so obsessed with denying what you are and going instead for reality, which basically is kind of a progressive liberal disease.
Well, that takes me back to your original position, Michael, and it's good that you that you pay some attention to being even-handed and looking at the other side of the issue, but I don't think that the Equality Act is an anti-bullying statute, one. Second, I don't see the United States Congress has any business getting involved in anti-bullying. And three, and most important, this is all a power trip. This is a particular aspect of what we were talking about the last time you called. It's identity politics, it's neo-Marxism, and it's the idea of gaslighting people so that they think that the stuff that they really knew, like, you know, it takes a man and a woman to have a child, is all false. And it's that same attempt to enforce this, not to tolerate it, not to accept it, but to force it, to celebrate it, so that these things that you and I just finished talking about are not something that are an aberration, but they're the new normal. And those of us who grew up under the old normal are the odd people, and they're the people, we are the oppressors, and they are the oppressed, and we must be overthrown.
Totally agree, and I completely 100% agree with that position. And you also said earlier, and you hit it right on the head, but it was a little bit in passing, I felt, where you said this is part of the movement to remove individualism and turn everybody into a nameless, featureless blob that can be more easily controlled by central planning. I mean, the central planning, which is what's the goal of all these Marxist progressive liberals, even if they don't even realize it, what they want to do is strip everybody of their individuality down to maybe one or two identities or even none, and that's why they're making gender a joke. They're making gender a nonsense. So that way we no longer have 50% male, 50% females or any of that. We just have one faceless mass or mob, and we can then assign X amount of tampons and X amount of toilet paper on a same person, not trying to take an effect there. So thanks.
Okay, thanks for calling, Michael.
All right.
Well, we got to take a short break here, and then I'm going to come back to, see, where am I here? Judy versus Simon, Mike, and Francis.
2-for-1 dinner time is back at Ruby Tuesday Guam. That's 2 fresh garden bars, 2 tasty entrees, and a sweet dessert to share for just $25.99. 2-for-1 dinner time for a limited time at Ruby Tuesday Guam.
Some interesting things are going on in the human resources side of things, and I don't think these are short-term trends. I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, I may have spotted a few things that are going to change at least a part of the employment landscape, and I'll have that for you.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
So, 7th inning stretch. We do have the CLTC on the card today if we get to it. Perhaps that will prompt, Jack Haddock to call in and make a cameo appearance right here on Tall Tales, even if he can't suit up and play baseball. Okay, once upon a time, there was a group of 5 people known as the CCU. They were a strange group, and they spoke a language that only they could understand, and they had a hard time understanding the language of the people around them spoke. And they had a penchant for secrecy. Whatever they did, they liked to do it in secret. And when they were found out, they would fess up and say, yeah, we shouldn't have done that in secret. But we really don't want anybody to know what we talked about when we were in that secret room. This is the saga of the CCU. So if you've been following along, you'll know that when the CCU got caught providing a salary increase in executive session, which is dead against the law, the Attorney General told the Attorney General told them, you can't do that, fellas. You got to get the money back. And then a plethora of Freedom of Information Act requests arose wanting to see the minutes for that executive session and wanting to listen to the electronic recording of that session. The electronic recording of all sessions is supposed to be posted on the public auditor's website. The minutes are supposed to be posted on the websites of GPA and GTA. But some of the commissioners, namely the chairman named Joey, decided that he didn't want to do that, and he was able to find a right of privacy that has escaped the eyes of even the most dedicated searcher. So the CCU denied these requests until a meeting was held on Tuesday where the members of the CCU took a vote, and Joey Duenas and Judy Guthertz voted against releasing the records. Mike Limtiaco made a motion to release. Simon Sanchez seconded it, and Francis Santos voted in favor. So the motion carried. So that meant that something had to be done with respect to the denial that had issued earlier, which, by the way, hadn't issued from the commission itself because the commission hadn't met to discuss it. Well, when the motion carried, the chairman of the commission, Joey Duenas, said, well, let me back up a second. It was determined that a letter would have to be prepared to send to each of those people who submitted sunshine law requests, your ever popular host being one of them, that a letter should be prepared to them saying, yeah, we denied your request, but we've taken a vote and we've changed our mind, and now we're sending the minutes along to you. The chairman of the CCU, Joey Duenas, said, I'm not going to sign that letter. Joey was also quoted at the very beginning of the controversy saying, I'm not going to give any of those minutes away. I want a judge to tell me I have to do it. I'm not going to do it. And now that his commission has voted to do it, as a general principle, when a board or commission takes an action, if the board or commission has an executive secretary, the executive secretary would sign a letter on behalf of the commission. The CCU does not have an executive secretary, so one would expect that the chairman would sign letters going out on behalf of the chairman. But Joey said, no, I'm not going to sign it. So once again, I had to go back to the law books to see if there's a provision in the law dealing with the CCU that provides that when a motion goes against the chairman, if the chairman can pout, because that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing the chairman of the CCU pouting. Now, I listened to the transcription of that whole meeting where they decided to send the minutes out. And a little free advice here, if you would try to keep a recording from people, maybe that would be the one, because some of you folks did not sound very good in that recording. Some of the things you said, you may want to walk back later on. And this was in an open meeting and recorded, etc. So Another story appeared in the Post today about the CCU and the fact that they have changed their mind. Majority rules. 3 people said, send the stuff out. One of them pouted, Joey Duenas, and the other one had a pretty interesting take on the whole thing, too. So I'm going to go into the story that Kevin Kerrigan wrote in today's Post, and I'm going to have to do my Rush Limbaugh routine again, Real Joe Cruz. I don't like to talk about myself, but this time I have to. Right? Yeah. So the title of the story is 3 CCU commissioners recognized for transparency vote. In the face of multiple Freedom of Information Act requests and the threat of being sued, 3 of the 5 members of the Consolidated Commission of Utilities on Tuesday evening voted to release the minutes of a closed-door meeting during which salary increases and bonuses were discussed in violation of Guam's open government law, and their action didn't go unnoticed. Voting for disclosure of the meeting records were Commissioners Sanchez, Santos, and Limtiaco. Government transparency advocate and attorney Bob Klitzkie said the 3 commissioners who voted to release the meeting minutes, quote, commenced the restoration of credibility to the CCU. The people, that is ratepayers, benefit, Klitzkie said, because 3 commissioners ended the game of hide the ball at the CCU. Now, if I could go back and add a little bit to those well-chosen words of your favorite afternoon talk show host, the CCU has lost a tremendous amount of credibility because of the way they handle this. And once again, it's like Richard Nixon learned back in the Watergate days. It wasn't the crime, it was the cover-up that ate him up. And with respect to giving the raises in executive session, it was a crime. It's a petty misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor, excuse me, or it could be a misdemeanor. They made a mistake, and every single one of them has taken multiple opportunities to say, well, our intent was good. We didn't intend to do anything sneaky or anything like that. So if they had come out of that meeting after they got caught and said, yeah, we screwed up, we're going to get the money back right away, and we're going to post those minutes on the 2 websites, and we're going to ask the public auditor to post the electronic recording on her website, this whole thing would have been forgotten by now. And the talk in the coffee shops and taverns would have been Joey who? Because Joey's name would have passed into oblivion. But by playing hardball or hide the ball or whatever it was that they did with the ball concerning the minutes and some of the silly things they said in defense of playing hide the ball, they lost. If we're going to use a standard of from 1 to 100, they probably lost 35 points. By going into executive session to give what I think is pretty generally agreed on as exorbitant raises. But then by playing hide the ball with the minutes, they lost another 50 or 60 points. They lost more points on that than they did on the illegal meeting. So if they had just done the right thing and released the minutes and the recording right away, let a few weeks go by, try to get some good press in the meantime, and then go back and do the raises, not do them all at one time, but spread them out a little bit. Do it in open session. Make sure you properly notice up the open sessions. Lay a foundation, get some press as to why you think the raises are important before you do it. It could have come out of this winners. But a couple of you people are going to be branded not only that you lost, but you're losers. because of the way you handled yourself in this. So if you still have some idea, now the next thing that happens is that the CCU is going to go into executive session next Tuesday as part of their regular meeting, and that's because there is a suit pending against them. And the rules do allow them to go into executive session to discuss litigation with their lawyer. And and the minutes of the minutes and a transcription of the executive session would be embargoed for a period of 6 months or even longer for good cause shown to a court. So they can discuss the pending litigation in there. But since a couple of them have gone so far towards violating our trust, I am suspicious that they'll use that executive session to do more than talk about the case in which Joey is a defendant, and perhaps try to take another bite at this apple. So we got to watch them very carefully with respect to this executive session that's coming up. And fair warning, before you go into executive session, there's supposed to be a letter from counsel as to why you're doing it. You can bet on the freedom of the FOIA coming up for that instantly, folks up there at the CCU, because I think that I'm not out of step with the rest of the public. The public is tired of this gamesmanship, this hide the ball. Now, I'm going to go a little farther into the story here. Getting past the part I really like because it's about me, Real Joe Cruz. Sanchez told the Daily Post that a court reporter will have to transcribe the audio recording of the meeting. He said the transcript will be available as soon as practicable. I don't know why they would want to do that, but if they do, fine. During their executive session on November 27, CCU commissioners discussed bonuses and pay increases for executives of the power and water authorities. They subsequently approved the pay adjustments without disclosing the names of those who had received them or how much they were given. The salary increases and bonuses were eventually disclosed after the Post requested for their release. However, until Tuesday evening, the CCU denied requests to disclose any record of their closed-door meeting, saying it was held to perform personnel evaluations of several employees of GWA and GPA, and disclosure would be an unwarranted invasion of the employee's personal privacy. Well, good story, but that isn't actually what the CCU said. I mean, those were words that were kicked around, but there was no motion by the CCU to adopt that particular position. Last month, the Attorney General advised the CCU that the bonuses and raises are void because they were discussed in a closed-door meeting, which requires all salary adjustments to be discussed during public meetings. The pay increments have since been rescinded. The two CCU members who opposed the release of the minutes were Chairman Jerry Duenas, Mr. Pout, and Commissioner Judy Gutherts. Duenas previously cited his concerns over disclosing confidential personal information about employees. Now, if they were discussing confidential personal employee information about personal employees in executive session, they already did something wrong. And he has recommended seeking court guidance on what can and cannot be released. Joey, it's time to pull up your pants and act like a commissioner instead of someone who is so lacking in institutional courage as to do his job. At the meeting Tuesday night, Gutherts pointed out that attorney Vince Leon Guerrero, outside legal counsel hired by the CCU, recommended against release of the November executive records without consulting the Attorney General's office and without guidance from the courts. So we started out, the Power Authority had a lawyer, the Water Authority had a lawyer, And they were right on the job, because when this illegal and executive session was held, they were in the session. And they got raises. And because of that, when the rest of it came up, they were conflicted, so the CCU hired another lawyer, Vince Leon Guerrero, as their so-called conflicts counsel. Okay, it's time. We're going into the home stretch. I got just enough time to finish this up before the end of another perfect day on Tall Tales.
Hey, it's Mom. Somebody forgot to thaw the chicken, so meet us at Chili's for 2 for $25. Oh, and congratulate your sister for making the basketball team. She's thrilled. Love you. See you at Chili's.
Enjoy 2 full meal combos for $25. An appetizer, 2 mouth-watering entrees like our crispy chicken breast, smoked barbecue quarter leg, or smoked jalapeno cheddar sausage. Served with corn on the cob and french fries. 2 bold combos for $25. A full-on meal deal available nightly for a limited time. Together, we Chili's.
Gallivant.
Let's go cruising.
We all have different ways to describe how we get up and go in our cars. But whatever you may call it, you can do more of it when you save 6% off your fuel purchases at any Shell station when you use your eligible Bank of Guam Visa and MasterCard credit cards. So stop by any Guam or CNMI Shell station and start saving today. Visit bankofguam.com for more information. Terms and conditions apply. Bank of Guam, the People's Bank. Member FDIC.
So that's the call to the post at Churchill Downs, Lexington, Kentucky. We are now in the home stretch of another edition, an exciting, educational, informative edition of Tall Tales, right up until 6 o'clock. So I left off here reading this article that said that described the reasons that Joey the Pouter Duenas doesn't want to release information because he doesn't want to disclose confidential personal information about employees. No one would ever expect him to do that. We wouldn't want him to do that. Joey, if you ever are in a position where you have confidential personal information about employees, don't release it. Now, Guthert said she did not vote for the release for similar reasons. At the meeting Tuesday evening, Gutherts pointed out that Vince Leon Guerrero, outside counsel hired by CCU, recommended against the release of the November executive session records without consulting Attorney General's office. So I made the point, how many more lawyers do we have to get involved here? If we go to the Attorney General, it would be 4. It's kind of like pedo terlahi in psychiatric evaluation or psychological evaluations. You got to keep doing it until you get the answer you like, I guess. Now, after the vote approving the release of the minutes, Guthert made a motion to take this matter to the courts to get a legal interpretation. Well, who are you going to sue, Judy? You can't write a letter to the court saying, "Dear Judge, we've got these really interesting questions. We'd like you to give us your advice." Courts only rule on cases and controversies. In other words, when A sues B, if there isn't a plaintiff and defendant or petitioner and respondent, you're not going to get the judge to say anything. Good call, Judy. I mean, anything to avoid the issue, I guess, is a good call. She then goes on to say this. She said, a section of the open government law, quote, is very specific, and it says personnel matters are not public. I'm going to read that again. A section of the open government law is very specific, and it says personnel matters are not public. Okay. So if that's the case, I would like Commissioner Gutherts to show me where the words personnel matters appears in the law. Because if you took the time to read a couple of the letters that I posted on, one of them actually made the post. A couple of them were posted on frombob.blogspot.com. You'll see that I exhaustively went through that point. The words personnel matters don't appear in the law. Nowhere. It's another one of those, well, everybody says that, or everybody knows that. We can't talk about it because it's a personnel matter. Just not so. That's not what the law says. Now, I would expect, that the caliber of people on the CCU, given their formal education and their experience with the CCU, would know better than to just come out and spout something that has no legal foundation as a justification for withholding something from the people. And that's what Commissioner Gutherts is doing. She says, a section of the open government law is very specific. Well, that means it's not implied. It's not something that you got to parse. It's not something you got to put together. It's very specific, and it says personal matters are not public. Well, I'll read something here that is in the law that's part of this controversy that's very specific, and it goes like this. Under no circumstances, however, shall a public agency hold an executive session or closed meeting to discuss salaries, salary levels, or salary adjustments of any employee or officer. All such discussions or decisions must be held in a public meeting, and minutes shall be kept and open to the public. Now, I'd say that's very clear. Wouldn't you, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
It's about as clear as you'll get when it comes to statute.
Crystal.
Yeah. Now, you compare that, with the will of the wisp called the language personnel matters can't be disclosed, which appears nowhere in statute. And you wonder how much faith we can have in Commissioner Gutherts to make the decisions that the CCU makes that sometimes involve millions of dollars. So going back to this article, after Gutherts' quotes, it's very specific. It says personal matters are not public. Klitzkie, however, has countered that there is a difference between personnel and personal matters. He has argued that the issues dealing with an employee's performance of the job can be discussed publicly, but personal information about the employees themselves cannot. Now, doesn't that make a lot of sense, Real Joe Cruz?
It does, sir.
Yeah, so we could talk about an employee's performance on the job, but we really shouldn't get into talking about, which one of his girlfriends we think is the prettiest. That would be a personal matter, right? Klitzkie also raised the open government law issue on his Tall Tales radio program On the Point. And given that, to think that they could still be wrong when it's been right here on the point, I don't know. But we're going to be back tomorrow. We're not going to give up. We're going to keep pounding away until people finally see the light, which means they agree with me. See you tomorrow.